My name is Talmo Pereira. I'm a PI at the Salk Institute, and I have a lot of slides to cover. So let's get into it. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our foundational work in quantifying behavior in the first place. A lot of this is essentially computer vision and pose estimation. And then we'll get into some of our more recent work on modeling behavior, or modeling the generative process of behavior through neuromechanical simulation. So getting into the first part here, we kind of came at this with the observation that all life evolved the ability to move in some way or another, whether a plant growing through soil or a giraffe walking through a savanna. So it seemed like a useful technical task to solve was to convert images and videos that look like this down to their distilled out representations that comprise their degrees of freedom afforded by their bodies that might look a little bit like this. These collection of dots that still allow you to tell what behavior and what dynamics are being expressed by these different kinds of organisms. To do that, we went through several iterations of developing deep learning-based systems to facilitate this. And one of our more prominent products of this is a system called Sleep. Sleep essentially solves this problem of taking arbitrary videos of animals or whatever else is articulated and moves and leveraging deep learning. And won't go into all the algorithmic challenges that we had to face and solve, but suffice to say that it's an end-to-end framework that goes from raw videos to tracked key points on any number of animals in any kind of setting. And we applied this out to a whole bunch of different experimental settings. We worked closely with lots of different experimentalists to make sure that their needs were covered. Part of that was enabled by a lot of industry-grade software engineering. We put a lot of work into the machine learning system itself. It's really not a single algorithm or single architecture, but many, and through all stapled together through a configurable system that allows provenance, tracking, a nice user interface, make it easy to install, manage dependencies, and do the whole research software engineering stack for open source science. It's a challenge, but it has really been very fruitful in making an impact and seeing a lot of adoption in the scientific community. Okay, one of the things that we're doing in my lab as part of this, as part of applying this kind of framework to create better behavioral data that characterize organisms, is to scale this up. And so one application of this is, okay, well, we can automate now behavior tracking, kinematic tracking. How can we then use that to capture tons and tons of data to map out the manifold, the space of what natural behavior looks like, and can we learn more about what creates disease from this? So this is what a lot of behavioral time series look like, and you can see that there is a lot of structure in here. There's a lot of information that you can pull out of it. We worked with some folks at Stanford and Harvard to apply probabilistic graphical models that can learn to discover the underlying discrete structure in these postural time series. This gives us a scalable way to make sense of what's happening inside these squiggles. And we've been pointing this at neurodegenerative disease characterization, where we're able to now, just from a totally data-driven manner, find the behavioral motifs derived entirely from the key points, from their movements, the types of behavioral biomarkers that correspond to progression into degenerative diseases. Helpful as a way to just do screening and phenotyping, but where it's going to start to become very powerful is really in scaling this thing up. And so we're now at around 10 billion time steps worth of kinematics, comprising around 7 animal years across a bunch of different setups. And we've spun up a company to continue to develop the infrastructure and hardware needed to continue to scale the data collection around what it looks like to move like a mouse in both disease and natural states. Okay, easy peasy. Let's now go into the fun problem of, all right, we can measure behavior. Great, how can we leverage it then to understand the brain? And this goes into this whole task of neuromechanical simulation. So if we think about an abstracted model of how behavior is produced, we might think that it starts off with the central nervous system that sends out motor commands, some magic happens, and we get behavior, hopefully well-aligned human behavior. And if for those aficionados, let's say like neuroscientists, we might care about something like the sensory inputs that give rise and inform that behavior. Okay, well, let's consider a counterfactual here. Here is a fish, swimming upstream, performing lots of complex movements, responding to the dynamics in a flowing, proxy for a river. And you might be able to infer all sorts of neural codes and neural programs that give rise to these kinds of behaviors. But the kicker is that, of course, this fish is dead. They picked it up at the market that same morning of the experiment. all of the movements, all the dynamics that you're seeing here are being driven entirely through mechanical intelligence, or the kinds of computations that are happening within the body. In fact, the whole premise of this part of our work is acknowledging the fact that we've largely neglected the influence of the musculoskeletal system and the external environment in generating and producing realistic behavior. So when I started my lab, I reached out to our friends at Harvard and DeepMind that were just developing out this biomechanical model of a rat that was grounded in real data, in scans, and that had actuators that could be controlled by an artificial neural network controller that serves as a proxy of the brain. Okay, great. Well, if we have a body model and we have physics simulation to reproduce what the environment does, then if we stick in an artificial neural network to control a central nervous system, maybe we have a digital twin, something that can produce movement and recapitulate the core function of the brain. Now, the thing is, we tried it out, and we stuck it in simulation, and we asked this rat body to do the kind of things that real rats can do. And while it can absolutely do the sensory to motor transformation, and it can learn to do so using a neural controller that acts on a real body, it's not quite converging on the same behavior as the real rats would. Maybe closer to a digital cousin than a digital twin. We're not going to learn a ton about, make a lot of inferences about the biological system. So maybe a drunk rat, yeah. So how do we make them more realistic? We had to solve a couple of different problems, and this is a culmination of several years of work that is finally getting ready to be submitted now, where we've come up with a general system for doing inverse kinematics, or aligning the motion capture data, the post-tracking data, to the digital twin, and then essentially doing motor observational learning. This is sometimes called imitation learning. Technically, there's some distinctions there. Effectively, what we're doing is we're showing it what real animals moving look like, and we're asking the neural network to optimize a control policy that can reproduce that same trajectory. I'm going to cut into my question time a little bit. So we start off with a target trajectory. We tell it what we want it to achieve. We feed that into a neural network that will learn to compress that into a motor program, and then feed that into a second neural network, so it serves as a decoder. It will learn to take my intention, what do I want to do in this embodied environment, and output a set of actions, or how do I control my body to realize the same movement. And as we had lots of connectome talks, this gives us a substrate. It gives us a direct place in which we can inject our connectome as our prior for the neural architecture. But okay, we can do this early in training. They don't do that great, fall over a lot. But as we progress through a lot of steps of physics simulation and training, these guys start to move like real animals. And we generalize this. We show that this can work with all sorts of different body types and all sorts of different kinds of control policies, such that we now have a general recipe to go from kinematics plus a biomechanical body model to a neural control model, something that does what the brain does and produces outputs that are realistic, all the way down to very realistic muscle-based biomechanics. So now when we go back to our whole task here of improving the alignment with behavioral, with behavior in terms of our AI controllers, what we can now do is, by having it learn off of how to move like a real animal first and then solve these tasks, it's able to do so in a way that is much more aligned to biology. It's not only aligned to biology, it's fully transparent. We can stick an electrode wherever we want in this virtual brain and decompose out all of the criteria that are used to make decisions around, should I jump or should I fall into this infinite gap, and will I be able to move forward? We're able to do this at the level of really precise kinematics, all the way down to modeling a muscle activation, and some preliminary work here. We're even able to leverage this and with simultaneously recorded EMG, predict the activity that's occurring in the muscle-based controllers. We can use this finally to discover neural subspaces for control policies, where if we unroll it out, here we have several principal components of our control space, something that would be too degenerate to find in the kinematics. Instead, we find disentangled interpretable representations of the computations that give rise to complex, freely moving behavior, and we can even control it. Here is a little quick demo of us retargeting, yeah, 20 seconds. We're retargeting a PlayStation controller to move a fruit fly. And this leads us into the topic of our workshop in a few minutes, which will be on creating the virtual neuroscience lab, a way to, through simulation, accelerate the way that we understand and model the brain. And with that, thank you guys, and thank all the folks who did the work and funded it.
Amazing. Awesome.